Thank you for joining us. I am Jennifer Follett with CRN, and I am here with Mike Crosby of NPD. Mike, thanks so much for being with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
We have a lot of good stuff to get to. We're going to be talking about some research that NPD has done recently, the future of B2B technology. Give us a little overview of what that piece looks at.
The really interesting thing about this is future of technology really takes into account three different data points that really constructs kind of a forward-looking outlook for the technology business. And for this one specifically, it's B2B, and we include macroeconomic data, plus we have a significant amount of historical point of sale information. And lastly, we use the team of industry advisors and analysts to do an aggregation of the information and then make some final determinations on where it's going. So it's a pretty comprehensive process that we go through. And I think with that, comes out a nice output that really shows, again, not only what we believe is occurring today, but also how that casts forward in the future.
So one of the big things that probably the solution provider channel is going to be interested to hear is that NPD is expecting to see year-over-year revenue and unit sales increase by 8% in 2022. What can you tell us about those increases?
Yeah, it's interesting because as you look at where the Q1 performance is already, we've already seen really B2B come out of the gate fairly aggressively, even with all the headwinds that we consistently hear about between supply chain challenges and between clearly the pandemic and what's occurred over the last couple of years, and then along with issues with geopolitical across the globe. I mean, there's all of these things, but yet if you look at performance-wise, notebooks just did absolutely tremendous in Q1. Monitors as well, it was even a higher number than we saw previously. Large format commercial displays. I mean, I can name off a number of these technologies that what really I think transpired is we saw people return to work. We saw a little bit of that blip with Omicron, and then we saw really it accelerate, not only against the pent-up demand that was there, but also with the expectation of people returning to work. The thinking was prior to the Q1 performance that we would see a little bit of a softening overall in the number, which actually did the opposite. And one of those reasons why I think is because we saw quite a bit of employees really for the first time, in fact, maybe voicing their opinion around this hybrid model and saying this is my most productive self when I'm working remotely. And I think as we've seen, employees now are carrying much more influence than maybe they have ever before relative to the directions that companies are headed.
So that's 2022. What does that mean going forward then for 2023 and even into 2024? Because it sounded like you had a little bit of ups and downs on the horizon there.
A little bit. I think what the term that we're using is more normalization. So we're anticipating that we'll still fight through this pent-up demand and this imbalance between inventory and demand. But the intent would be, or the hope would be, that as we get through 2022, we'll start to see prices normalize, one. You'll also see a little bit of a lull in demand, and we'll get back in sync and back in balance between supply and demand in 2023. So the expectation is it's less about it's going to be a declining number. It's more about that you're going to see ASPs come back in line, and that's going to pull that revenue number down. That's going to make it comp negative on a year over year. But overall, I think a lot of that's going to be based on the fact that you're going to be through the worst of it relative to these significantly inflated prices. We'll see those prices normalize in a lot of categories. It brings it back down again. And again, the goal would be obviously get back in a nice balance between supply and demand.
So with the current research in hand, it looks like you're projecting down 1% in 2023 and then a small return to growth for 2024 up 2%.
Yes. And I think, again, a lot of what you can see in these inside the numbers specifically, as we'd said, we're going to see growth in 2022 where there's still both growth in units and in dollars. And a lot of that still remaining with still a relatively high and inflated ASPs. We're likely to see that start to decline at the end of 2022 and improve in 2023, which is ultimately going to drive that little bit of pause, that little bit of lull in revenue. And then we see that coming back in 24, more of a normalized position and more in balance between supply and demand.
You touch on ASPs, that's average selling price. What impact should solution providers expect to see from inflation on that?
Again, I think the challenge continues to be at least through 2022 and likely maybe early in 2023, not in all categories, that we're still going to be challenged with much higher pricing. It's not only the higher costs associated in raw materials or bill of materials for manufacturers, but also increased transportation. So as we start to see this crest and then decline, again, we'll start to see the benefit of that. Unfortunately, they tend to go up the fastest, but kind of be a lagging kind of indicator as we go forward. So prices will still, again, remain high, even though we start to see some of these costs come down. And then we'll see that again drop back down, likely the end of 2022, and then again, much more in line with what we're expecting in 2023 and 24.
Regarding the supply chain, there's still a number of technology vendors that are reporting financial results that show impact of that. How is that playing out with the solution providers? Are they able to get different product? Are they still kind of stuck? Are you able to tell what's the kind of in the field story there?
Yeah, it's just unfortunately, right, it's just the unpredictability. I think what we have seen though is the channel has responded in a lot of different ways. One is they're being much more proactive. They're taking more of a buffer and inventory position on key products. They're having to allocate a little bit tighter down to their obviously most critical customers and most critical projects as they go. So all of those tactics are going on, but I do think, to your point, they all are looking at alternatives. In some technologies, the nice thing is there's typically, if they can find kind of a bridge technology that still meets the requirements of the end user, but there's better availability, it allows them to look a little bit wider. I think the channel has done just an unbelievably great job of just being able to be agile, which is really showing up nicely, especially if you look at how the business is performing already now in Q1.
Agility is certainly one of the hallmarks of solution providers, and I think that brings me to my next question, which is, we've been talking a bit about hardware, but a lot of progressive solution providers are really pushing forward on software and cloud services and things in that nature. What kind of growth are you seeing there?
I mean, if you look at those two areas specifically between cloud, on cloud-based infrastructure and commercial software, I mean, massive growth and continues. We saw it not only early in the pandemic, but we're seeing that same trend continuing and accelerating. So for cloud-based infrastructure, I mean, we're still looking at 31%-ish around 2022 in units, 35 in dollars, but again, it's going to tread 34, 35, 34 really over the next 3 years. So we're seeing good, strong demand indicators by customers. I think channel is also embracing that. We're also seeing a broader purview of customers where we used to see that primarily around enterprise, and now you're seeing depth in that or breadth of that within mid-sized companies, and now you're seeing small businesses actually start to embrace much of this, where they typically had on-site and on-premise servers that they were managing to, but now they're looking at, again, that term that we just used, agility, and what are some ways that I can take advantage of that flexibility, scalability, and agility, and where I can really optimize my business by putting my headcount really that engage directly with customers, rather than burn a number of headcount in building out my own infrastructure. And I think they're learning, do I have it on premise where I do it myself, or do I leverage off the expertise that brings, again, that scalability and agility of the channel? And that's where I think you're seeing that, again, not only at enterprise, but you're seeing that now also develop all the way downstream to small business as well. Software, similarly, I mean, we're seeing the ongoing migration, still the majority of software. We're still seeing around collaboration, especially right now. Very critical. What's interesting is for small business, there's far less remote-based workforce kind of resources. But for midsize and enterprise, certainly a significant part of their workforce is now remote.
We'd be remiss if we talked about collaboration and work from home and we didn't touch on security, which clearly is a big element of that. Did you see any surprising growth in security sales, or was it kind of what was anticipated?
I was less surprised, I think, because as you're saying, I think recognized, depending on what either size company or vertical, security is hypercritical. Certainly with midsize and enterprise, with the remote-based force, security was going to be critical, and I think there was a lot of questions early that when many made that pivot to remote, I think they took a fairly basic approach, because it was almost like triage. We have to move everyone from here to here and be up and running and be ready to go. And I think there were a lot of just blocking and tackling basics that were done, but then there was more time to think after that. And you're seeing a lot of that optimization now that they're going to now zero trust, and many changes that are going on for the go forward. And I think you're going to see much more of that as well. The other thing that I'm seeing a significant amount of within education, because we're seeing ransomware just run rampant. And unfortunately, with the IT infrastructure that was, for the most part, very lacking, in education, we saw it really as really a point of exposure. And I think the good news is a lot of the investment that's being made now in education is around not only broadband and infrastructure, but also more importantly around security. So I think there's a high recognition of how critical security is, not only again with the remote force, but also when you get into some of the verticals. Healthcare is another one, education, both super, very high priority and very critical to what needs to happen, not only today, but again, moving forward into the future.
One of the big high-level storylines in technology throughout the pandemic was this push toward digital transformation and how much more quickly that started happening in the wake of the pandemic. How is that translating into sales through 2022?
It's going to continue to be a huge driver in expansion and growth. And again, as we kind of looked at it like there's two, maybe there was digital transformation 1.0. And we're talking now about more digital transportation 2.0. Here's how I'm defining them. 1.0 was really more, as I mentioned earlier, physical to digital. And it was really more of that basic structuring where you can get that scalability through access and other means as you move to this efficiency of now having digitally, having moved from physical to digital. 2.0 really is now a much different level of sophistication, as I mentioned earlier, tapping into things like machine learning and automation and IoT, and seeing those types of emerging technologies really become integrated now in how they manage their business operationally. And they're really starting to see, digital transformation 2.0 isn't so much just this is a need to have, but it's need to have in driving value back within the organization. So I think you're going to see absolutely as companies continue to expand and again, leverage these emerging technologies, you're going to see it continue to morph and get more sophisticated, more expansive. And I think it's just going to keep being a very nice accelerant to new growth and new business, because there's going to be a lot of, again, efficiencies and optimization that's going to continue to occur. And again, those are all both great drivers for incremental opportunities for the channel.
Mike, when you look at all of this data in aggregate, what's the story for solution providers that are really trying to figure out where the untapped opportunities are, where they should be placing their big bets throughout the rest of this year, and then as they look forward to 2023?
I think like we've already seen in the past, now hardware again is still a significant contributor overall to the mix. But if you look at between hardware, software, and services, you're starting to see that continued migration. Again, hardware is still the dominant in the 60s, but you're seeing expanding in those other areas. I think for solution providers really need to be able to look at that total solution, which they're so great at. But I think looking and understanding from a cloud perspective, software certainly. And as you also get into even some of these new subscription-based models, I think it's going to be interesting to see where and how the channel plays. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of talk. I think it's still in fairly early stages, but I think financial people are really liking the differences between OpEx and CapEx and understanding how can I even be more agile? How can I only pay for what I need? So it's really, bandwidth or technology on demand.
And what about newer or emerging technology areas? What are the indicators of which areas are really going to be in the spotlight, say like 2023, 2024?
I mean, edge is growing extremely fast, and you're seeing more and more companies now and technologies being adopted even within verticals. Let's say healthcare is an example with IoT and monitoring, where again, you're going to need edge that's going to be able to drive that low latency response that's back. But you're seeing that also IoT even in manufacturing or robotics. You're seeing IoT in supply chain, where now they have the ability to track and monitor shipments. You're going to see much more in automation again relative to the different areas and how companies are manufacturing product, how they're operating as well. So I would say probably it would definitely be certainly AI, IoT, machine learning is going to continue to be critical. And again, you're looking at the integration of not one of these, but in many ways, multiple ways that these technologies are improving that again, ability to scale and manage, to monitor, and really become as efficient as they can be in driving that forward solutions. But it's not going to be without challenges or without pain. I think there's still a real transition going on that as industries specifically start to move to some of these emerging technologies, and what does that mean for the employee base? We're still seeing, though, as we talked earlier, there's a significant shortage of employees for positions that are available here, and I think a lot of those are changing. And I think as companies are looking at, what are ways that we can redeploy people, maybe we can automate in some areas, but then we can utilize those headcount in other ways and through retraining and other means to be able to drive other parts of our business. I think it's always going to be a challenge, but I think people are up for it, and I think certainly times are exciting. I think there's a lot of change, but a lot of positive change.
We have a lot of business savvy solution providers in our audience, Mike. What are the real nuggets that you think that they should really try to grab onto here and take some real actionable business movement on as they head through the rest of this year?
I mean, near term, again, staying close to their customer. I think we've already seen more than anything is as these needs and requirements are changing in many cases, customers don't know what they need yet. And I think as solution providers can continue to be in the forefront relative to these emerging technologies and ways and how they can be deployed in some of these use cases that align closely to their customer, I think now they're strategic partners in so many ways. Not only looking at hardware, but software, but services, and how do I tie all those together without burning up all of my resources to where I can deploy my investment in people and other things closer to my customers. I think it's as they've done. I mean, they're entrepreneurial, in spirit anyway. You'd also, one other point I guess that I would raise is security, as you'd mentioned earlier. It's such a significant part of the ways that are so critical in the ways that companies are going to be doing business, especially with this hybrid world expanding. That really the expertise and the scalability around security, I think, will be very well rewarded, certainly in 2022, but also moving forward.
In short, 2022, great year to be in the channel. 2023, same thing?
Yeah, I think, again, you're going to see pricing come down, which is nice. ASPs will come down, but at the same time, we're going to see their costs come down, because certainly these guys have had to deal with the brunt of also those inflated pricing for their own businesses and how their own businesses operate. But I think as we see this kind of normalizing again, I hate to just keep throwing that term out, but it really is. It's I think the fever is broken relative to what we've been going through, and hopefully with inflation on the way down, and again, seeing more return to more predictable growth, more predictable supply chain. I think we're through a huge chunk of it. There's still more work to do, certainly, but I think we're on the downhill of this, and again, looking for some certainly more stable business and opportunities for growth moving forward.
Sounds good. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you being here with me today and sharing some NPD insights from the future of B2B technology research. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.